The scorching sun beat down on Kingman, Arizona, as Victoria Thornton stormed out of Mayor Holloway's office, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the glass pane. The townsfolk lingering on the boardwalk paused to stare, their judgment palpable. Victoria straightened her spine, refusing to cower beneath their scrutiny. This was the third time this month she'd caused a scene, but she wouldn't apologize for speaking her mind not when she was right. The year was 1885, and Kingman was growing rapidly thanks to the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad. But with growth came greed, and Victoria couldn't stand by while the mayor and his cronies snatched up land that rightfully belonged to the local ranchers. The fact that she was a woman with opinions made her dangerous in the eyes of Kingman's elite, but Victoria had long since stopped caring what they thought of her. "Miss Thornton," Mayor Holloway's voice boomed from the doorway, "you'll regret your accusations. Mark my words." Victoria turned, her auburn hair escaping its pins as she faced him. "The only thing I regret, Mayor, is not speaking up sooner." The gathering crowd murmured disapprovingly. Victoria caught fragments of their whispered condemnations: troublemaker, unladylike, disgrace. She'd heard it all before, but it still stung. At 25, most women her age were married with children, not picking fights with town officials and defending struggling farmers against corrupt politicians. "That Thornton woman is nothing but trouble," someone said, loud enough for Victoria to hear. She squared her shoulders and marched toward her horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Pepper. As she approached, she noticed a tall stranger leaning against the hitching post, watching her with undisguised interest. His black Stetson was pulled low, but she could still see his striking green eyes studying her. Victoria ignored him, reaching for Pepper's reins. "Quite a show you put on in there," the stranger said, his voice deep and tinged with amusement. "I wasn't performing for an audience," Victoria replied curtly, adjusting her saddle. "No, you were standing up for what's right." He straightened, revealing his impressive height. "I hear they call you a troublemaker around these parts." Victoria paused, turning to face him fully. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of long days working outdoors. His clothes were dusty, but well made, a working cowboy with some means, she guessed. "And what business is that of yours, Mr. Garrett Walker?" he said, tipping his hat. "New foreman at the Triple Creek Ranch." Victoria felt her stomach drop. Triple Creek belonged to Harold Jenkins, one of the mayor's strongest allies. "Then we have nothing to discuss, Mr. Walker." "I wouldn't be so sure," he replied, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "I've only been in town a week, but I've already heard plenty about the infamous Victoria Thornton." "All bad, I'm sure," she said, mounting her horse. Garrett stepped closer, resting a hand on Pepper's neck. "They say you're a troublemaker, that you don't know your place." His eyes met hers, and to Victoria's surprise, they held respect, not condemnation. "Good. Trouble keeps life interesting." Victoria was momentarily speechless, unused to finding an ally rather than another critic. Before she could respond, Garrett stepped back. "I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other, Miss Thornton. I look forward to it." With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked toward the saloon, leaving Victoria to stare after him, puzzled by the encounter. She nudged Pepper into motion, heading home to the modest ranch she'd inherited from her father 3 years ago. The T-bar T wasn't large, but it was hers, and she'd fight tooth and nail to keep it. As Victoria rode, dust billowing behind her, she couldn't shake thoughts of Garrett Walker. What game was he playing? No one who worked for Jenkins would side with her against the mayor. Yet there had been sincerity in those green eyes, or at least, she thought there had been. The T-bar T came into view as Victoria crested the hill. It wasn't much compared to some of the grand spreads in the territory, but the sight of it still filled her with pride. Her father had built it from nothing, and when consumption took him, Victoria had defied everyone who said a woman couldn't run a ranch alone. 3 years later, she was still proving them wrong. Her foreman, Hank Dobson, waved from the corral where he was breaking a new Mustang. At 62, Hank was more father than employee to Victoria, having promised her dying father he'd look after her. How'd it go with the mayor? Hank called as she dismounted. Victoria handed Pepper's reins to the stable boy. About as well as expected. He claims the water rights agreement never existed. Hank's weathered face darkened. That's a damned lie. Your pa and old Mayor Tuttle signed those papers 15 years ago. Well, those papers have mysteriously disappeared from the town records, Victoria said, removing her gloves. And without them, Holloway says Jenkins has every right to dam the creek. Without that water, half our grazing land is useless, Hank muttered. Victoria nodded grimly. I know. We're not the only ones affected either. The Simmons place and even the Millers will suffer if Jenkins redirects that water. Hank leaned against the fence post. The Millers might side with us, but Simmons is too afraid of crossing Jenkins. Man's got 5 kids to feed. Victoria understood the fear. Harold Jenkins wasn't just wealthy, he was ruthless. Since arriving in Kingman 3 years ago, he'd systematically bought or bullied his way into controlling most of the best land in the county. Those who resisted often found themselves facing mysterious misfortunes: fires, cattle stampedes, vandalism. Nothing could ever be traced back to Jenkins, but everyone knew who was responsible. We'll figure something out, Victoria said with more confidence than she felt. Oh, I met the new foreman at Triple Creek today. That would be Walker, Hank said. Heard he came up from Texas, supposed to be good with horses and even better with a gun. Victoria frowned. Why would Jenkins need a gunman? Hank shrugged. Maybe he expects more resistance to his plans than the mayor lets on. The thought was unsettling. If Jenkins was bringing in hired guns, the situation might be worse than Victoria had imagined. There's something else, she said, lowering her voice. This Walker fellow. He wasn't what I expected. He almost seemed. Approving of my confrontation with the mayor, Hank's bushy eyebrows shot up. Jenkins' man approved of you causing trouble. That doesn't sound right. I know, Victoria shook her head. I can't figure out his angle. Be careful around him, Tori, Hank warned, using the nickname only he was permitted. Men like Jenkins don't hire people who don't share their views. Victoria nodded, but as she headed toward the house, her thoughts returned to Garrett Walker's parting words. Trouble keeps life interesting. What exactly had he meant by that? The next morning, Victoria rode into town early, hoping to speak with Judge Lester before court began. The judge was one of the few officials in Kingman who hadn't fallen under Jenkins' influence, and Victoria hoped he might know something about the missing water rights agreement. As she approached the courthouse, she was surprised to see Garrett Walker emerging from the building. He spotted her immediately, changing direction to intercept her. Miss Thornton, he greeted, tipping his hat. Beautiful morning. Victoria reined Pepper to a stop. Mr. Walker, court doesn't start for another hour. What business brings you to the courthouse so early? A smile played at his lips. Curious, aren't you? I was just familiarizing myself with the town, first time in Kingman. Victoria didn't believe him for a second. And the courthouse was your first stop, not the saloon or the mercantile. I find the law fascinating, he replied easily. Don't you? When it's applied fairly, Victoria said. Unfortunately, that's becoming rare in Kingman. Garrett glanced around before stepping closer to her horse. Perhaps we could discuss this further. Say, dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. Are you asking me to dine with you, Mr. Walker? I believe I am. His green eyes held her steadily. 7 o'clock. Victoria should have refused. Dining with Jenkins' foreman would only fuel the town gossip, and heaven knew there was already enough of that surrounding her name. But something about Garrett Walker intrigued her, and if there was even a small chance he could provide insight into Jenkins' plans. Very well, she said. 7 o'clock. Garrett's smile widened. I look forward to it, Miss Thornton. As he walked away, Victoria wondered if she'd just made a colossal mistake. Judge Lester was less than helpful regarding the water agreement. While sympathetic to Victoria's plight, he explained that without the original document, there was little he could do. The law requires proof, Miss Thornton, he said kindly. Your word against the mayor's isn't sufficient. Victoria left the courthouse frustrated but not defeated. There had to be another copy of the agreement somewhere, or a witness who could testify to its existence. Her father had been meticulous about his business dealings. Surely he'd kept a copy at home. The rest of the day passed in a blur of ranch work. Victoria threw herself into physical labor, helping Hank and the hands repair fencing in the north pasture. Manual work always cleared her head, and by late afternoon, she'd formulated a plan to search her father's old study for any documentation that might help her case. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, she reluctantly headed back to the house to prepare for her dinner with Garrett Walker. Part of her wanted to cancel, to send one of the ranch hands with a message of apology. But Victoria Thornton wasn't one to back down from a challenge, and Garrett Walker was certainly that. She bathed quickly, washing away the dust and sweat of the day's work, then selected one of her few good dresses, a deep blue calico that her father had once said matched her eyes. Her hair, usually hastily pinned up for ranch work, she arranged more carefully, allowing a few auburn curls to frame her face. Where are you off to looking so fancy? Hank asked when she descended the stairs. Dinner in town, Victoria replied, avoiding his eyes as she fastened her mother's cameo at her throat. Hank's eyes narrowed suspiciously. With whom? Victoria sighed. Garrett Walker. Jenkins' man. Hank's voice rose in alarm. Tori, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that knowing your enemy is wise, she replied. Besides, there's something about him that doesn't quite fit with what we know of Jenkins' operation. Or maybe that's exactly what he wants you to think, Hank countered. This could be a trap. Victoria picked up her shawl. In the middle of the hotel restaurant, I think not. But if it makes you feel better, I'll be on my guard. Hank muttered something that sounded suspiciously like stubborn as a mule, but he didn't try to stop her. The ride into town gave Victoria time to compose herself. She wasn't naive. She understood that Garrett Walker might well be using her for information. But two could play at that game, and Victoria was determined to learn what she could about Jenkins' plans. The hotel restaurant was moderately busy when Victoria arrived. Garrett was already seated at a table near the window, and he stood as she approached. Up close, she noticed details she'd missed before: a small scar above his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly higher than the other when he smiled. Miss Thornton, he said, pulling out her chair, you look lovely. Victoria settled into her seat, arranging her skirts. Thank you, Mr. Walker. Please call me Garrett. Then you must call me Victoria. A waiter appeared with menus, and they fell into the comfortable rhythm of selecting dishes. Once their orders were placed, Victoria decided to take control of the conversation. So, Garrett, she began, how did you come to work for Harold Jenkins? If he was surprised by her directness, he didn't show it. I worked cattle drives in Texas for years, made a name for myself managing difficult herds. Jenkins offered good pay and a permanent position, seemed like a step up from drifting. And how are you finding it so far? Garrett's expression was unreadable. Interesting. Jenkins has ambitious plans. Yes, I've heard, Victoria said dryly. Most of them involve taking land and water rights from people who have worked this area for decades. To her surprise, Garrett didn't immediately defend his employer. I gather you're one of those people, Victoria nodded. My father established our ranch 20 years ago. The water from Creek Creek is vital to our operation. Jenkins Dam would destroy us and several other small ranches as well. I see. Garrett took a sip of his water. And the mayor supports Jenkins in this. Mayor Holloway would support the devil himself if the price was right, Victoria said bitterly. There was an agreement guaranteeing water rights to all ranchers along the creek, but it's conveniently disappeared from the town records. Garrett leaned forward slightly. Do you have a copy? Victoria hesitated. I'm looking for one. My father must have kept documentation. Their food arrived, momentarily halting the conversation. Victoria used the interruption to study Garrett more carefully. He had the calloused hands and sun-weathered skin of a man who worked outdoors, but there was something in his bearing that suggested education and perhaps a different background than the average cowboy. You're not what I expected, she admitted as they began to eat. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Oh. And what did you expect? Someone more. Aligned with Jenkins' views. Someone who would see me as nothing but a troublesome woman who doesn't know her place. Is that how most men see you? He asked. Victoria laughed without humor. Most men in Kingman can't decide if they should marry me off or run me out of town. A woman running a ranch, speaking up at town meetings, challenging the mayor, it's more than they can stomach. Their loss, Garrett said simply. Intelligence and courage are admirable qualities, regardless of who possesses them. Victoria felt a blush creep up her neck. Now you're just flattering me, Mr. Walker. Garrett, he reminded her. And no, I'm stating facts. It takes courage to stand alone against powerful men. I'm not alone, Victoria said. My foreman, Hank, has stood by me, and there are others who agree with me privately, even if they're too afraid to speak publicly. Garrett nodded thoughtfully. Fear is a powerful motivator. Jenkins understands that. And what motivates you, Garrett? Victoria asked, watching him closely. What does a man like you want out of life? For the first time, Garrett seemed caught off guard. He set down his fork, considering her question. A place of my own someday, I suppose. Land, cattle, the chance to build something lasting. There was sincerity in his voice that Victoria couldn't dismiss. Before she could respond, the restaurant door opened, and Harold Jenkins himself entered, accompanied by Mayor Holloway. Victoria tensed immediately. Jenkins was a large man, both tall and broad, with a florid face and small, calculating eyes. He spotted them almost immediately, his expression darkening as he recognized Victoria. Well, well, he said, approaching their table. Miss Thornton and my foreman, what an unexpected pairing. Garrett rose to his feet smoothly. Mr. Jenkins, Mayor, we were just discussing the cattle business. Is that so? Jenkins' tone made it clear he didn't believe them. His gaze shifted to Victoria. I heard about your visit to the mayor's office yesterday, Miss Thornton. Still causing trouble, I see. Victoria lifted her chin. Standing up for what's right isn't causing trouble, Mr. Jenkins. Jenkins laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Victoria's nerves. Women always think they know what's right. That's what makes them so dangerous and so amusing. Victoria felt her temper rising but fought to maintain her composure. If you'll excuse us, we were in the middle of dinner. Of course, Jenkins said with mock politeness. Walker, I'll expect you at the ranch early tomorrow. We have matters to discuss. Yes, sir, Garrett replied, his expression neutral. As Jenkins and the mayor moved to their own table, Victoria released the breath she'd been holding. "That man makes my skin crawl." "He has that effect on many people," Garrett said, retaking his seat. "I apologize for the interruption." Victoria shook her head. "It's not your fault, though I imagine you'll have some explaining to do tomorrow." "Let me worry about that," Garrett said, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "Victoria, there's something I should tell you." The sound of breaking glass interrupted him as a commotion erupted at the bar. Two cowboys were squaring off, their argument quickly escalating into shoving. The restaurant patrons turned to watch, including Jenkins and the mayor. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation elsewhere," Garrett suggested quietly. "Would you care for a walk? The evening is pleasant." Victoria hesitated only briefly before nodding. Garrett quickly settled their bill, and they slipped out while the disturbance at the bar continued to draw attention. The evening air was cool after the heat of the day, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Victoria pulled her shawl around her shoulders as they strolled down the boardwalk. "You were about to tell me something," she prompted. Garrett glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I wasn't entirely truthful earlier about why I came to work for Jenkins." Victoria's guard immediately went up. "Oh, I'm not just a foreman," Garrett said, his voice low. "I'm investigating Jenkins on behalf of certain interested parties in the territorial capital." Victoria stopped walking, staring at him in disbelief. "You expect me to believe that?" "It's the truth," Garrett insisted. "Jenkins has been acquiring land through questionable means across 3 counties. There are suspicions of bribery, fraud, even violence. But no one's been able to prove anything because witnesses suddenly change their stories or disappear." "And you're what?" "A lawman," Victoria asked skeptically. Garrett shook his head. "Not officially. I used to be a ranger in Texas. Now I work privately gathering evidence for cases that are difficult." Victoria's mind raced. If Garrett was telling the truth, this could change everything. But if he was lying, revealing too much to him could be disastrous for her and the other ranchers resisting Jenkins. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Why risk your cover?" Garrett's expression was earnest. "Because I need your help. You know the people here, the history. And you've stood up to Jenkins openly. If anyone has evidence of his wrongdoing, it would be you." Victoria resumed walking, needing the movement to process his revelation. "Suppose I believe you. What exactly would helping you entail?" "Information," Garrett replied, falling into step beside her. "Access to people who might have been wronged by Jenkins but are too afraid to speak up. And if you do find that water rights agreement, I'd need to see it." They reached the end of the boardwalk, turning onto a quieter side street. Victoria weighed her options carefully. Her instincts told her to trust Garrett, but she'd been wrong about people before. "I'll need proof," she finally said. "Something to verify your story." Garrett nodded, unsurprised by her caution. "Fair enough. There's a telegram you can send to Judge McCreary in Prescott. He'll confirm my identity." Victoria considered this. "I'll send it tomorrow. Thank you." Garrett's relief was evident. "And until you receive confirmation, I understand if you're cautious about what you share." They walked in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the saloon piano drifting through the night air. "It must be difficult," Victoria said eventually. "Living a lie, pretending to support a man like Jenkins." Garrett's expression hardened. "Men like Jenkins prey on the vulnerable. They twist the law to serve their greed. I've seen it before." Something in his tone suggested personal experience. "Is that why you left the Rangers?" Victoria asked gently. Garrett was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. "My family had a small ranch in West Texas," he finally said. "A man much like Jenkins wanted our water rights. When my father refused to sell, There was an accident, a fire that killed both my parents. The local law did nothing. I joined the Rangers hoping to find justice, but you couldn't prove it, Victoria finished softly. No, Garrett confirmed. But I learned how men like that operate. That's why I do this work now. Victoria felt a new understanding of Garrett forming. His story resonated with her own fears that Jenkins would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, and that the law might not protect those who stood in his way. I should get you back, Garrett said, checking his pocket watch. It's getting late, and I don't want to damage your reputation further. Victoria laughed. My reputation? Mr. Walker, I'm afraid that ship sailed long ago. I'm the troublemaking spinster who can't keep her opinions to herself. Remember, Garrett smiled, and this time it reached his eyes, transforming his face. I remember. Trouble keeps life interesting. As they walked back toward the hotel where Victoria had left her horse, a comfortable silence fell between them. Victoria found herself wondering what might have happened if they'd met under different circumstances, if he'd been just a cowboy, and she just a rancher's daughter, with no Jenkins standing between them. I enjoyed our dinner, Garrett said as they reached Pepper, despite the interruptions. As did I, Victoria admitted, though I suspect your employer won't be pleased when he hears about it. Garrett helped her mount, his hands strong and sure as he gave her a boost into the saddle. Let me worry about Jenkins. You focus on finding that water rights agreement. Victoria gathered the reins. I'll start searching my father's study tomorrow. Be careful, Garrett warned. Jenkins has eyes everywhere in this town. I could say the same to you, Victoria replied. If he suspects you're not who you claim to be. Garrett's expression was grim. I know the risks. Victoria hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her. Why did you approach me so openly? In front of the mayor's office that first day and then asking me to dinner. Wasn't that dangerous for your investigation? Garrett's lips curved into a small smile. Perhaps, but I needed to establish contact with someone Jenkins wouldn't suspect me of aligning with. And he paused, looking slightly embarrassed. I wanted to meet the woman brave enough to stand alone against the most powerful men in the county. Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Good night, Garrett. Good night, Victoria. Ride safely. As Victoria urged Pepper into a trot, heading back to the T-Bar tea, her mind was swirling with everything she'd learned. If Garrett was telling the truth, she finally had an ally in her fight against Jenkins. If he was lying, well, she'd find out soon enough when she sent that telegram. Either way, trouble had certainly found her, but for the first time in months, Victoria felt a flicker of hope that things might turn out all right after all. The following morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching Arizona day. Victoria rose early, determined to search her father's study before the day's ranch work demanded her attention. The study was a small room off the main parlor, largely untouched since Thomas Thornton's death. Victoria had maintained it out of respect for her father's memory, dusting the furniture and occasionally sitting in his old leather chair when she needed to feel close to him. But she'd never thoroughly examined the contents of his desk or the filing cabinet in the corner. Starting with the desk, Victoria methodically went through each drawer, carefully examining every document. Her father had been organized with separate folders for ranch expenses, cattle sales, and property matters. In the bottom drawer, she found a thick folder labeled Water Rights and felt her heart quicken. Inside were various documents related to Creek Creek, including surveys, maps, and correspondence with the previous mayor. And there, at the back of the folder, was what she'd been searching for. A copy of the Water Rights Agreement, signed by her father and Mayor Tuttle, dated 15 years earlier. The document clearly stated that all ranches along Creek Creek had equal access to its water, and no landowner could divert or dam the creek without the consent of all affected parties. Victoria clutched the paper, relief washing over her. This was proof that Jenkins' planned dam was illegal. With this document, she could challenge him in court, but as she reread the agreement, a disturbing thought occurred to her. If Jenkins and Mayor Holloway had removed the town's copy from the records, what would stop them from claiming this copy was forged? She needed more evidence, witnesses, perhaps, or proof that the original agreement had existed and been deliberately removed. Victoria carefully returned the document to its folder and locked it in the desk. She would show it to Garrett, but only after confirming his identity with Judge McCreary. After a quick breakfast, Victoria rode into town to send the telegram. The telegraph operator, Elmer Wiggins, raised his eyebrows at the message but asked no questions, for which Victoria was grateful. With the telegram sent, Victoria headed to the mercantile to pick up supplies. As she was selecting items, she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "Did you hear about Victoria Thornton dining with Jenkins' new foreman last night?" one woman whispered. "I did indeed," the other replied. "Poor man probably doesn't know what he's getting himself into." "That woman is nothing but trouble. Jenkins was furious, from what my husband heard, called Walker into his office first thing this morning." Victoria's stomach clenched with worry. Had their dinner put Garrett in danger? She finished her shopping quickly and was about to leave when she nearly collided with Martha Simmons at the door. Martha was the wife of one of the other ranchers affected by Jenkins' dam plans. Her husband, David Simmons, had initially supported Victoria's opposition, but had recently fallen silent on the matter. "Victoria," Martha greeted her with obvious discomfort, "I didn't expect to see you in town today." "Just picking up a few things," Victoria replied. "How are you, Martha?" "How's David?" Martha glanced around nervously. "We're managing. The children are well." Victoria lowered her voice. "Martha, I found proof about the water rights agreement, the one that would stop Jenkins from building that dam." Martha's eyes widened, but instead of relief, fear crossed her features. "Victoria, please don't involve us. David can't. We can't afford to cross Jenkins." "But the dam will affect your ranch too," Victoria pressed. "With this proof, we can stop him legally." Martha looked close to tears. "You don't understand. 2 nights ago our barn caught fire. The men barely got the horses out in time. The next morning David found a note nailed to the door. It said, 'Accidents happen.'" Victoria felt sick. "Jenkins? Who else?" Martha whispered. "Please, Victoria." "We have 5 children to think about." Before Victoria could respond, the mercantile door opened, and Harold Jenkins himself entered. Martha immediately stepped away from Victoria, mumbling an excuse before hurrying down an aisle. Jenkins approached Victoria with a cold smile. "Miss Thornton." "Another beautiful day, isn't it?" Victoria stood her ground. "Mr. Jenkins." "I saw you having dinner with my foreman last night," Jenkins said conversationally, but his eyes were hard. "I hope he was good company." "Very good company," Victoria replied. "Mr. Walker is quite knowledgeable about ranching." "Among other things," Jenkins said. "I'd be careful around him if I were you. He's not the type to settle in one place long. Wouldn't want you getting attached." There was a threat beneath his words that Victoria couldn't quite decipher. Was he warning her away from Garrett, or was there something more sinister at play? "I appreciate your concern," Victoria said coolly, "but I'm perfectly capable of choosing my own company." Jenkins stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know, Miss Thornton, life would be much easier if you were reasonable. Your little ranch isn't worth much now, but with proper investment, it could be profitable. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer." My ranch isn't for sale, Victoria said firmly. Everything has a price, Jenkins countered. Even your father understood that in the end. Victoria frowned. What are you talking about? My father would never have sold to you. A smug smile spread across Jenkins' face. No, then you might want to look more carefully through his papers. You might be surprised by what you find. With that cryptic remark, Jenkins tipped his hat and moved past her toward the counter, leaving Victoria shaken. What had he meant about her father? Thomas Thornton had despised men like Jenkins. He would never have considered selling the ranch, unless... Had her father been in some kind of financial trouble she hadn't known about? He'd been ill for months before his death. Had the medical expenses overwhelmed him, Victoria completed her purchases quickly and left the store, her mind racing. She needed to get back to her father's study and search more thoroughly. As she was loading her supplies onto Pepper, she heard someone call her name. Turning, she saw Garrett approaching, looking grim. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here," Victoria nodded. "I was heading home." "If you ride with me partway, we can talk privately." Garrett glanced around, then agreed. He retrieved his horse, a powerful black gelding, from the hitching post, and they rode out of town together, maintaining a careful distance until they were well beyond the town limits. "Jenkins knows something," Garrett said once they were alone on the trail. "He called me in this morning, questioned me about our dinner. He seemed particularly interested in what we discussed." "What did you tell him?" Victoria asked. "That I was trying to gather information about the other ranchers, their vulnerabilities. That you seemed like the type who might inadvertently reveal useful details." Garrett's expression was apologetic. "I had to make him believe I was using you." Victoria understood the necessity, but the words still stung. "Did he believe you?" "I think so," Garrett said, "but he's suspicious by nature. He assigned one of his men to shadow me when I'm in town." He glanced over his shoulder. "I lost him temporarily, but we shouldn't be seen together too often." Victoria nodded, then shared what she'd learned, both her discovery of the water rights agreement and Martha's revelation about the fire at the Simmons Ranch. "Intimidation is Jenkins' favorite tactic," Garrett said grimly. "I've heard rumors about other accidents at ranches that resisted his offers." "I also found something strange," Victoria added. "Jenkins implied that my father might have been considering selling our ranch before he died. That's impossible. My father loved that land." Garrett frowned. "Could Jenkins have been bluffing, trying to shake your confidence?" "Possibly," Victoria admitted. "But there was something in his tone. I need to search my father's papers more thoroughly." "Be careful," Garrett warned. "If Jenkins is worried about what you might find, he could take action." They had reached a fork in the road, one path leading to the T-Bar T, the other to Triple Creek. Victoria reined Pepper to a stop. "I should hear back from Judge McCreary tomorrow," she said. "If he confirms your story, I'll show you the water rights agreement." Garrett nodded. "I'll try to meet you in town around noon. If I'm being followed, I'll tip my hat twice. In that case, don't approach me." "This is all very cloak and dagger," Victoria observed with a hint of nervousness. "Jenkins has killed before," Garrett said bluntly. "I can't prove it yet, but I believe it. I don't want you becoming his next victim." The seriousness in his voice sent a chill through Victoria. "You think he'd go that far?" "Men like Jenkins don't let anything stand in their way," Garrett replied. "Not the law, not morality, and certainly not a troublemaking woman, no matter how brave she might be." There was concern in his eyes that touched Victoria deeply. Despite having known him only a short time, she sensed his worry was genuine. "I can take care of myself," she assured him. "I keep a rifle by my bed and a revolver in my desk." "Good," Garrett said. "But be vigilant. And if anything seems wrong, anything at all, get word to me through Elmer at the telegraph office. He owes me a favor." They parted ways, Victoria continuing to the T-Bar T while Garrett turned toward Triple Creek. As she rode, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that things were accelerating toward some inevitable confrontation. Jenkins clearly wanted her land badly enough to threaten and intimidate. But why? The T-Bar T wasn't particularly large or valuable compared to other properties he'd acquired. Back at the ranch, Victoria immediately returned to her father's study, this time focusing on the financial records from the months before his death. What she found disturbed her deeply. Medical bills, loans against the property, mounting debts. Her father had been in dire financial straits while trying to hide his deteriorating health from her. And there, dated just 2 weeks before his death, was a letter from Harold Jenkins offering to buy the T-Bar T for a sum that would have cleared all Thomas Thornton's debts and left Victoria with a modest inheritance. There was no response letter in the file, but a notation in her father's handwriting read, "Refused will find another way." Victoria sat back, relief washing over her. Her father hadn't agreed to sell, despite his desperate circumstances. But Jenkins' offer explained his cryptic comment at the mercantile. He must have believed Thomas Thornton would eventually accept, only to have death intervene before the deal could be completed. As Victoria replaced the papers, a small envelope fell from between the folders. Inside was a key with a tag labeled First Bank of Kingman Box 13. A safety deposit box one Victoria hadn't known existed. What had her father been keeping there? Tomorrow, Victoria decided. After meeting with Garrett, she would visit the bank. For now, she needed to focus on the ranch and try not to worry about what Jenkins might do next. The following day, Victoria arrived in town shortly before noon. Her first stop was the telegraph office, where Elmer handed her a reply from Judge McCreary. G. Walker identity confirmed. Assist as possible. Proceed with caution. Relief flooded through Victoria. Garrett had been telling the truth. She wasn't alone in her fight against Jenkins after all. Her next stop was the bank, where she presented the key and asked to access Box 13. The bank manager, Mr. Peterson, seemed surprised but led her to the vault without question. Inside the safety deposit box, Victoria found several documents and a sealed envelope addressed to her in her father's handwriting. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "My dearest Victoria," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I have passed on without telling you the full truth about our situation. Forgive an old man's pride. The T-Bar T has been struggling for years, more than I let you know. The drought of '79 and the harsh winter that followed nearly ruined us. I took loans I couldn't repay, hoping for better years that never came. Recently, a man named Harold Jenkins has offered to buy our ranch. His price would clear our debts, but I don't trust him. There's something in his manner that reminds me of a rattlesnake before it strikes. I've refused his offer, but he's persistent. More troubling are the rumors I've heard about how he acquires land. The Parkers' place burned down after they refused to sell. Old man Williams died in a hunting accident after challenging Jenkins at a town meeting. I'm enclosing proof of our water rights and property boundaries. Guard these documents carefully. Jenkins wants our land for a reason beyond what he's saying. I suspect it has to do with the creek that runs through the northern section. Stay strong, my brave girl. You have your mother's spirit and my stubbornness. Those qualities will serve you well in the days ahead. Know that I love you more than life itself, and I'm sorry to leave you with this burden. Your loving father, Thomas Thornton." Victoria wiped tears from her eyes as she finished reading. Her father had suspected Jenkins of violence even then. And he'd hidden these documents to protect them from being destroyed or altered. Among the papers were the original deed to the T-Bar-T, showing its full boundaries, a geological survey of the property that her father had commissioned, and another copy of the water rights agreement, this one notarized and therefore more difficult to dismiss as a forgery. But it was the geological survey that caught Victoria's attention. It included notes about mineral deposits along Creek Creek, specifically copper. Was that why Jenkins wanted the land so badly? Copper mining was booming in the territory, with new railroads making it profitable to transport ore to distant smelters. Victoria carefully returned the papers to the box, taking only the notarized water rights agreement and her father's letter. She needed to show these to Garrett immediately. As she left the bank, Victoria scanned the street for Garrett. She spotted him outside the hardware store talking with another man. When he saw her, he touched his hat twice, the signal that he was being watched. Victoria's heart sank, but she understood. She would need to find another way to contact him. As she considered her options, she noticed Mayor Holloway emerging from his office across the street, accompanied by the sheriff. They were heading toward her. Victoria quickly ducked into the millinery shop, pretending to examine hats while watching through the window. The mayor and sheriff stopped on the boardwalk, apparently waiting for someone. A moment later, Jenkins rode up on his large bay horse, dismounted, and joined them in conversation. The three men spoke intently for several minutes, with Jenkins doing most of the talking. Victoria wished she could hear what they were saying. Suddenly, Jenkins pointed in Garrett's direction, and all three men looked toward the hardware store. The sheriff nodded, then began walking toward where Garrett stood. Victoria felt a surge of alarm. Had Jenkins discovered Garrett's true purpose in Kingman? She needed to warn him somehow. But before she could move, another man entered the millinery shop, one of Jenkins' ranch hands, a surly fellow named Burke, whom Victoria had seen in town occasionally. He didn't acknowledge her, but positioned himself near the door, effectively blocking her exit. Through the window, Victoria saw the sheriff approach Garrett. They spoke briefly, then Garrett followed the sheriff toward the jailhouse. It didn't appear to be an arrest, there were no handcuffs, and Garrett's posture remained relaxed, but it was concerning nonetheless. Victoria pretended to continue shopping, moving deeper into the store as she considered her options. Burke remained by the door, occasionally glancing in her direction. He was clearly there to watch her, perhaps to prevent her from warning Garrett about whatever Jenkins had planned. After selecting a hat she didn't want and paying for it to avoid suspicion, Victoria approached the door. "Excuse me," she said politely to Burke. He moved aside reluctantly, his eyes cold. "Miss Thornton." Victoria stepped onto the boardwalk, feeling his gaze boring into her back as she walked away. She couldn't go to the jailhouse without revealing her connection to Garrett. And with Burke following her, for she had no doubt she couldn't risk retrieving the documents from her saddlebag to hide them elsewhere. Her best option was to return to the ranch and wait for Garrett to contact her, if he could. The thought that he might be in serious trouble made her stomach twist with anxiety. As Victoria untied Pepper from the hitching post, she glanced toward the jailhouse. Through the window, she could see Garrett seated across from the sheriff, his back to her. They appeared to be having a calm conversation, which she hoped was a good sign. Victoria mounted Pepper and headed out of town, keenly aware of Burke following at a discreet distance. The man wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. Jenkins wanted her to know she was being watched. When she reached the T-Bar-T, Victoria went straight to Hank, finding him in the barn checking a horse's injured leg. "We have trouble," she said without preamble, keeping her voice low. "Jenkins has one of his men watching me, and I think he may have discovered that Garrett Walker isn't who he claims to be." Hank straightened, his weathered face concerned. "You trust this Walker fella now?" Judge McCreary confirmed his identity, Victoria replied. "He's investigating Jenkins for fraud and possibly worse." Hank whistled softly. "That explains a lot. What can I do?" "I need someone to go into town tomorrow, casually check on what's happening with Garrett, if he's been arrested or—" Victoria couldn't bring herself to voice her worst fears. "I'll go first thing," Hank promised. "What about the man watching you?" Victoria glanced toward the ranch entrance, where she could just make out Burke sitting on his horse at the edge of the property. "He's not hiding. That means Jenkins wants me nervous, off balance." "It's working," Hank observed, noting the tension in her shoulders. Victoria forced herself to take a deep breath. "I found something in the bank today. A letter from my father warning me about Jenkins and documents that might explain why he wants our land so badly." "There's copper in the creek bed, Hank." Hank's eyebrows shot up. "That would do it. Copper's bringing big money these days. And with the railroad so close, transportation costs would be minimal," Victoria added. "If Jenkins controls all the land along Creek Creek, he controls the copper." "What are you going to do?" Hank asked. Victoria squared her shoulders. "What my father would have done. Fight back. I have proof of our water rights now, and with Garrett's help, we might be able to expose Jenkins' illegal activities." "If Walker's still in a position to help," Hank pointed out grimly. Victoria nodded, her momentary confidence faltering. "Yes, if he's still able to help." That evening, Victoria could barely eat, her mind filled with worry about Garrett. Had Jenkins discovered his true identity? Was he in danger, or worse, already harmed? She tried to tell herself that Sheriff Tanner wouldn't allow violence in his jail, but she knew the sheriff was firmly in Jenkins' pocket. As darkness fell, Victoria sat on the porch, watching Burke's campfire glowing in the distance. He'd settled in for the night, apparently planning to maintain his vigil. The man's presence was unsettling, but at least it meant Jenkins still considered Victoria a threat rather than a problem already solved. A soft sound from the side of the house caught Victoria's attention. Hand moving to the revolver in her pocket, she rose silently and stepped into the shadows. "Victoria!" A familiar voice whispered. Her heart leaped. "Garrett!" He emerged from the darkness, finger to his lips. Victoria quickly led him around to the back of the house, away from Burke's line of sight. "What happened?" she asked once they were safely inside the kitchen. "I saw the sheriff take you to the jailhouse." "Jenkins is getting suspicious," Garrett explained. "He told the sheriff I've been asking too many questions around town. Tanner brought me in for a friendly conversation about my background." "Did he arrest you?" "No, but he made it clear I'm being watched." Garrett ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Jenkins is moving up his timeline. He's filed paperwork to begin dam construction next week." Victoria felt as though she'd been punched in the stomach. "Next week? But that's too soon. We haven't gathered enough evidence against him." "He knows we're onto something," Garrett said grimly. "He's accelerating his plans before we can stop him." Victoria paced the kitchen, mind racing. "I found something today. Documents my father hid in a safety deposit box, including a notarized copy of the water rights agreement." Garrett's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what we need." With that and statements from other affected ranchers. "The other ranchers are terrified," Victoria interrupted. "The Simmons had a fire. Others have had accidents too. No one will stand with us publicly." Garrett's expression hardened. "Then we'll need to find another way to stop Jenkins." "Did you discover anything else in those documents?" Victoria told him about the geological survey and the copper deposits. "That explains why Jenkins wants control of the creek so badly. It's not about water rights, it's about mining rights." "Copper," Garrett muttered. "Should have guessed." He's done this before in Colorado, forced out small ranchers to get at mineral deposits on their land. My father suspected something like this, Victoria said. He left me a letter warning me about Jenkins. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and both Victoria and Garrett tensed. A moment later, Hank appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. Thought I heard voices, he said, lowering the weapon when he recognized Garrett. You made it past Jenkins' watchdog, I see. Barely, Garrett admitted. He's not the most attentive guard. Hank snorted. Burke never was too bright. Coffee's still hot if you want some. While Hank poured coffee, Victoria and Garrett discussed their options. With Jenkins accelerating his plans, they needed to act quickly. If we had more time, I could bring in territorial authorities, Garrett said. But Jenkins has the local law in his pocket, and by the time officials from Prescott could arrive, he'll have started construction on the dam. Once that happens, it becomes much harder to stop, Victoria added. We need to file an injunction with Judge Lester immediately, using the notarized agreement as evidence. Jenkins will fight it, Hank warned, and he plays dirty. Which is why we need to be prepared for whatever he throws at us, Garrett said. Victoria, I think you should stay somewhere else for a few days. Jenkins knows you're the main obstacle to his plans, and with things coming to a head, I'm not leaving my home, Victoria interrupted firmly. My father stood his ground against Jenkins, and so will I. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. Then we'll need to increase security here. Hank, do you have men you trust completely? 3 or 4, Hank replied. Keep them close to the house, especially at night, Garrett instructed. And Victoria should never be alone. Victoria bristled at being discussed as though she weren't present. I can protect myself, Garrett. His green eyes met hers with unexpected intensity. I know you can, but Jenkins has resources and men willing to do violence for pay. This isn't about your capability, it's about the reality of what we're facing. The sincerity in his voice tempered Victoria's annoyance. He wasn't questioning her strength. He was genuinely concerned for her safety. Fine, she conceded. Hank, can you arrange extra men on watch? Hank nodded. Already planning on it. What about Burke out there? Let him watch, Garrett said. As long as he thinks he knows where Victoria is, he won't look for her elsewhere. Tomorrow, I'll create a distraction in town while Victoria takes the water rights agreement to Judge Lester. They spent the next hour refining their plan. Garrett would return to Triple Creek before dawn to avoid detection, then cause a commotion in town around 10 o'clock. While Jenkins and his men were occupied, Victoria would slip into the judge's chambers through the back entrance. It's risky, Garrett admitted as they concluded their planning. If Jenkins suspects what we're doing. Risk is part of life out here, Victoria said simply. My father taught me that. Garrett studied her face for a moment, admiration evident in his expression. Your father would be proud of you, Victoria. The words touched her deeply. I hope so. As Garrett prepared to leave, Victoria walked with him to the back door. Be careful, she said softly. Burke may not be bright, but he's dangerous. I've handled worse, Garrett assured her. Then, surprising them both, he reached out and squeezed her hand gently. Tomorrow, with luck, we'll begin to bring Jenkins down. Victoria felt a warmth spreading from where his fingers touched hers. With luck, she echoed. After Garrett disappeared into the darkness, Victoria returned to the kitchen where Hank waited, a knowing look on his face. That's a good man, he said simply. Victoria couldn't disagree. Despite having known Garrett for only a few days, she felt a connection to him that she couldn't explain, as though they were kindred spirits, both fighting against injustice in their own ways. If we survive Jenkins, you mean, she replied, attempting to lighten the moment. Hank wasn't fooled. When we survive Jenkins, he corrected her, And then you'll have to decide what comes next. Victoria had been so focused on stopping Jenkins that she hadn't thought beyond that immediate goal. What would happen once this was over? Would Garrett move on to another case, another town? The thought left her feeling strangely hollow. "One battle at a time, Hank," she said, avoiding the implication in his words. "Let's focus on winning this one first." Morning came with a sense of tense anticipation. Victoria dressed carefully, choosing practical riding clothes but pinning her hair more formally than usual. She wanted to look respectable when meeting with Judge Lester. Through the window, she could see Burke still maintaining his vigil near the property entrance. The man looked tired and irritable, occasionally taking swigs from a flask. Good and intoxicated guard was a less effective one. Victoria secured the notarized water rights agreement and her father's letter in an inner pocket of her jacket, then joined Hank for a quick breakfast. They reviewed the plan once more. Victoria would ride out the back way, taking a circuitous route to town to avoid being seen by Burke. Hank would create the impression she was still at the ranch by having one of the female kitchen staff wear Victoria's distinctive shawl while working in the garden. "Be careful, Tori," Hank said as she prepared to leave. "If anything feels wrong, you get out of there, agreement or no agreement." Victoria hugged the older man tightly. "I will, and you be careful too if Burke realizes I'm gone." "Don't worry about me," Hank patted the revolver at his hip. "Just do what needs doing." Victoria slipped out the back door and made her way to the small stable where they'd hidden a horse the night before. It wasn't Pepper, who was too recognizable, but a steady brown gelding that wouldn't draw attention. The ride to town took longer than usual due to her indirect route, but Victoria arrived without incident. She tethered the horse behind the mercantile and made her way through the alley toward the courthouse, keeping her head down and her pace unhurried. As she approached, she heard a commotion from the direction of the main street shouting, the sound of breaking glass. Garrett's distraction was underway. Victoria quickened her steps, slipping through the courthouse's back entrance as planned. Judge Lester's chambers were on the second floor. Victoria climbed the stairs quietly, relieved to find the hallway empty. She knocked softly on the judge's door. "Enter," came the response. Victoria stepped inside to find Judge Lester at his desk, spectacles perched on his nose as he reviewed a document. He looked up in surprise. "Miss Thornton." "I wasn't expecting visitors this morning." "I apologize for the intrusion, Your Honor," Victoria said, closing the door behind her, "but I have something urgent to show you." Judge Lester gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Please sit. What is this about?" Victoria withdrew the notarized water rights agreement and placed it on his desk. "This is a legally binding document signed 15 years ago by my father and Mayor Tuttle. It guarantees equal access to Creek for all ranchers whose properties border it, and explicitly prohibits any damming or diversion without unanimous consent." The judge picked up the document, examining it carefully. His eyebrows rose as he noted the notary seal. "This appears to be in order." "Where did you find this?" "My father left it in a safety deposit box," Victoria explained, "along with this letter." She handed him Thomas Thornton's final message to her. Judge Lester read the letter with growing concern. "These are serious allegations against Mr. Jenkins." "They're true," Victoria said firmly. "Jenkins has been intimidating ranchers, possibly worse, and now he's filed permits to begin dam construction next week." "Yes, I'm aware of the permit application," the judge said, removing his spectacles. "It crossed my desk yesterday." "Then you understand why I need your help," Victoria pressed. "This agreement legally prevents Jenkins from building that dam. I'm requesting an immediate injunction to stop construction until a full hearing can be held." Judge Lester seemed to weigh his options carefully. Victoria knew his reputation for fairness, but also recognized the risk he would be taking by opposing Jenkins so directly. "What you're asking could make me powerful enemies, Miss Thornton," he said finally. Victoria leaned forward. "With respect, Your Honor, upholding the law shouldn't be a matter of political calculation. My father believed in justice. He believed in the law, don't you?" The judge's expression softened slightly. "I knew Thomas Thornton. He was a good man, honest, hardworking. The kind of settler this territory needs." He picked up the water rights agreement again. "This document is legally binding. I cannot in good conscience ignore it." Victoria felt hope rising within her. "Then you'll issue the injunction." "I will," Judge Lester confirmed. "But Miss Thornton, be prepared. Jenkins will not take this lying down." "I understand the risks," Victoria said, "but this isn't just about my ranch. It's about stopping a man who believes himself above the law." Judge Lester nodded thoughtfully. "I'll prepare the injunction immediately and have it served this afternoon." Victoria thanked him and rose to leave, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. As she reached for the door handle, the judge spoke again. "Your father would be proud of your courage, Miss Thornton. But courage without caution can lead to tragedy. Be careful." It was the second time in 24 hours someone had invoked her father's pride. Victoria hoped they were right. "I will, Your Honor. Thank you." Victoria left the judge's chambers and made her way back down the stairs. As she reached the bottom, she heard angry voices from the main entrance. One of them belonged to Harold Jenkins. "Where is he?" Jenkins was demanding. "That troublemaking foreman of mine, I want him found." Victoria quickly ducked into an empty office, leaving the door slightly ajar so she could see. Jenkins was standing in the foyer with Sheriff Tanner and two of his ranch hands. All looked furious. "We'll find him, Harold," the sheriff was saying. "He can't have gone far after starting that brawl." "When you do, I want him arrested," Jenkins snarled. "Destruction of property, disturbing the peace, whatever charges will stick." Victoria's stomach clenched with worry. Had Garrett been identified as the cause of the distraction? She needed to find him, warn him about Jenkins' anger. She waited until the men moved deeper into the courthouse before slipping out the back way. The alley was clear, and Victoria hurried toward the main street, keeping to the shadows. The scene that greeted her was one of chaos. Several storefronts had broken windows. Chairs and tables from the saloon lay overturned in the street, and a group of men were still being separated by bystanders. There was no sign of Garrett among them. Victoria scanned the street anxiously, trying to spot him without being seen herself. Jenkins' men were everywhere, questioning townspeople and searching between buildings. Victoria retreated into the alley, considering her options. She needed to get back to the ranch to let Hank know the injunction had been secured, but she was also deeply concerned about Garrett. Had he been captured? Injured as she hesitated, a hand touched her shoulder. Victoria spun around, ready to fight, only to find Martha Simmons standing behind her. "Victoria," Martha whispered urgently, "you need to leave town now. Jenkins' men are looking for you too." "For me? Why?" Martha glanced nervously toward the street. "I don't know exactly, but I overheard one of them say something about the Thornton woman and teach her a lesson. Please, Victoria, go." "Have you seen Garrett Walker?" Victoria asked. "Jenkins' foreman," Martha nodded. "He rode out of town about 10 minutes ago, heading north. Had a bloody lip but seemed otherwise unharmed." Relief washed over Victoria. Garrett had escaped, at least for now. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." "We may be too afraid to stand with you publicly," Martha said quietly, "but that doesn't mean we don't support what you're doing. Be safe, Victoria." Victoria squeezed the other woman's hand gratefully, then hurried to retrieve her horse. As she mounted, She caught sight of Burke riding into town from the direction of the T-Bar T. He'd abandoned his watch post, which meant he'd likely discovered her absence. Victoria took the back trails home, pushing the gelding as fast as she dared on the rough terrain. She needed to warn Hank that Jenkins' men might be coming for them. As the T-Bar T came into view, Victoria was relieved to see no sign of trouble. The ranch hands were going about their normal activities, and smoke rose peacefully from the chimney of the main house. Victoria dismounted at the stables, handing the reins to a surprised ranch hand. "Have you seen Hank?" she asked breathlessly. "In the house last I checked," the young man replied. "Everything all right, Miss Thornton." "Fine," Victoria assured him, though it was far from the truth. "Just need to speak with him urgently." She hurried to the house, calling for Hank as she entered. There was no answer. Victoria moved through the rooms with growing concern. The kitchen was empty, though a coffee pot still warm on the stove indicated someone had been there recently. "Hank." Victoria called again, climbing the stairs to check the upper rooms. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the house's silence was unnerving. As Victoria descended the stairs, the front door opened. She tensed, hand moving to her pocket where she kept her small revolver, then relaxed when Hank entered. "Thank goodness," she said. "I was worried when I couldn't find you." Hank's expression was grave. "We've got trouble, Tori. Burke figured out you weren't here and rode back to town about an hour ago. I was just checking the perimeter, making sure we're secure." "Jenkins knows," Victoria confirmed, quickly explaining what had happened in town. "But I got the injunction. Judge Lester is issuing it this afternoon." Hank nodded approvingly. "That's good work, but it might not stop Jenkins from trying something before the law catches up to him." "Have you seen Garrett?" Victoria asked. "Martha Simmons said he rode north after the distraction in town." "No sign of him," Hank said. "But if he's smart, he'll lay low for a while. Jenkins is out for blood." Victoria moved to the window, scanning the property. The ranch hands were continuing their work, but she noticed they all wore sidearms unusual during regular ranch activities. "I've put the men on alert," Hank explained, seeing her observation. 4 are watching the approaches to the house. If Jenkins' men show up, we'll know." Victoria nodded gratefully. "Do you think they'll really come here? Try something violent?" "Jenkins is a man who gets what he wants," Hank said grimly. "And right now, what he wants is to stop you from interfering with his plans. The injunction will infuriate him." "Then we'll be ready," Victoria said with more confidence than she felt. "I won't be driven from my home by threats." As evening approached, tension at the T-Bar T continued to build. Victoria cleaned her father's revolver and kept it within reach at all times. Hank stationed men at strategic points around the property, with strict instructions to fire warning shots if strangers approached. Victoria tried to occupy herself with routine tasks, reviewing the ledgers, planning the next day's work, but her mind kept returning to Garrett. Where was he? Was he safe? And would she see him again before this conflict with Jenkins reached its inevitable conclusion? She was startled from her thoughts by a soft knock at the study door. One of the young ranch hands, Billy, stood there looking nervous. "Miss Thornton, there's a rider coming." One of Jenkins' men by the look of him. Victoria rose immediately. "Just one." "Yes, madam. Carrying something white might be a flag of truce." Victoria exchanged glances with Hank, who had appeared in the hallway. "Could be a distraction," he warned. "Get the men to check the back of the property." "Already done, sir," Billy assured him. No sign of anyone else approaching. Victoria moved to the window, drawing back the curtain slightly. In the fading light, she could make out a lone rider approaching slowly, a white cloth tied to his rifle barrel. To her surprise, it was Mayor Holloway himself, not one of Jenkins' ranch hands. "It's the mayor," she said. What on earth is he doing here? Nothing good, Hank muttered. Want me to send him packing? Victoria considered this, then shook her head. No, let's hear what he has to say, but keep the men ready just in case. Hank nodded and went to instruct the ranch hands while Victoria composed herself. She smoothed her skirt, checked that her revolver was secure in her pocket, and went to meet the mayor on the porch. Mayor Holloway dismounted stiffly, looking uncomfortable and out of place on a ranch. He was a town politician through and through, more at home behind a desk than on horseback. Miss Thornton, he greeted her, removing his hat. Thank you for receiving me. I'm surprised to see you, Mayor, Victoria replied coolly, especially at this hour. Holloway cleared his throat. I've come on a matter of some urgency. May we speak privately? Victoria gestured to the porch chairs. We can speak here. My foreman stays. The mayor glanced at Hank, who stood impassively nearby, hand resting on his holstered revolver. Holloway sighed but took the offered seat. I'll be direct, Miss Thornton. Judge Lester issued an injunction this afternoon preventing Mr. Jenkins from beginning construction on his dam project. I'm aware, Victoria said. I provided the judge with the legally binding water rights agreement that your predecessor signed with my father. Holloway shifted uncomfortably. Yes, well, that's part of why I'm here. Mr. Jenkins is displeased with this development. I imagine he is, Victoria replied dryly. He's authorized me to make you an offer, the mayor continued. A very generous one, double the market value for your ranch, paid immediately. You could move to San Francisco or even back east if you prefer, live comfortably without all this. He gestured vaguely at the ranch. Hardship. Victoria felt a surge of anger but kept her expression neutral. My ranch is not for sale, Mayor Holloway. Not at market value, not at double, not at any price. The mayor leaned forward. Miss Thornton, please consider carefully. Jenkins is not a man to be trifled with. The injunction has. Well, it's made him desperate, and desperate men can be dangerous. Is that a threat? Hank asked sharply. A warning, Holloway insisted. From someone who doesn't wish to see this situation escalate further. He turned back to Victoria. There are rumors that you've been associating with Garrett Walker. That's a dangerous connection, Miss Thornton. Victoria's pulse quickened. Mr. Walker is an employee of Mr. Jenkins. Any association I have with him is coincidental. Holloway gave her a knowing look. Jenkins is not a fool, Miss Thornton. He knows Walker is not what he claims to be, and he knows you've been conspiring together. If you're here to intimidate me, Mayor, you're wasting your time, Victoria said firmly. I will not sell my ranch, and I will continue to oppose Jenkins' illegal activities through every legal channel available to me. The mayor sighed deeply, rising from his chair. I tried to reason with you. Remember that in the days ahead. He settled his hat back on his head. Good evening, Miss Thornton. As Holloway rode away, Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The mayor's visit had been partly olive branch, partly threat, and she had just rejected both. That was as good as a declaration of war, Hank observed quietly. Victoria nodded. Double the guards tonight. I don't think Jenkins will wait long to make his next move. Night fell over the T-bar T, bringing with it a tense silence. Victoria found sleep impossible, instead sitting in her father's chair in the study, revolver on the desk beside her. Every creak of the house, every distant animal sound brought her to alert attention. Around midnight, there was a soft tap at the window. Victoria grabbed her revolver and approached cautiously, ready to call for Hank at the first sign of trouble. To her astonishment, Garrett's face appeared in the glass. Victoria quickly unlocked the window and helped him climb through. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "The ranch is being watched." "I know," Garrett replied softly. I had to dodge 2 of Jenkins' men to get here, but I couldn't stay away, not after what I discovered. In the lamplight, Victoria could see a dark bruise forming on Garrett's jaw and a cut above his eyebrow. "You're hurt." He waved off her concern. "It's nothing. Victoria, listen, Jenkins is planning something big." After the injunction was served, he gathered his men at Triple Creek. I managed to overhear part of it before they spotted me. Victoria led him to a chair. "What's he planning?" "The dam was never just about water rights," Garrett explained. "The copper deposits are just part of it. Jenkins has been working with investors from San Francisco to build a smelter near Kingman. They need the creek water for processing, and they need control of all the land with copper deposits." Victoria frowned. "But why the secrecy? Mining is legitimate business." "Not the way Jenkins plans to do it," Garrett said grimly. "He's cutting corners on safety, planning to use methods that would poison the groundwater for miles around, and he's bribed officials to look the other way." Victoria absorbed this information with growing horror. That would affect every ranch, every farm in the area. The water would be undrinkable for people and livestock. "Exactly," Garrett confirmed. "And with the railroad so close, they could ship the copper out before anyone realized the extent of the damage. By then, Jenkins and his investors would be rich, and the land would be worthless." "We have to stop him," Victoria said firmly. "We need to get this information to Judge McCreary immediately." Garrett nodded. "I've already sent a telegram requesting territorial marshals, but they won't arrive for at least 2 days. In the meantime, Jenkins is planning to take matters into his own hands." "The mayor was here earlier," Victoria told him, "offering to buy the ranch, warning me that Jenkins is desperate." "He is," Garrett agreed, "and that makes him more dangerous than ever." He reached across the desk, taking Victoria's hand in his. "I'm worried about you." "Jenkins knows we've been working together. He'll come for you, Victoria." The concern in his voice touched her deeply. "I'm not afraid." "You should be," Garrett said softly. "Not for yourself, perhaps, but Hank. Your ranch hands. Jenkins won't hesitate to harm them to get to you." Victoria hadn't considered that her stubbornness might endanger others. The thought filled her with dread. "What should I do?" "Leave just for a few days," Garrett urged. "I have a friend with a cabin in the mountains. You'd be safe there until the marshals arrive." Victoria pulled her hand away. "Run and hide, while Jenkins terrorizes everyone else. That's not who I am, Garrett." Garrett leaned back, studying her with a mixture of frustration and admiration. "No, it's not, and that's what worries me." His voice softened. "It's also what makes you remarkable." Something in his tone made Victoria's heart beat faster. Despite the danger surrounding them, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she was acutely aware of Garrett's presence, of the way his green eyes reflected the lamplight. "Why did you really come here tonight?" she asked quietly. "You could have sent a message through Elmer at the telegraph office." Garrett was silent for a moment. "I needed to see you," he admitted finally, "to make sure you were safe, to warn you personally." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "To see your face again in case." "In case what?" "In case things go badly tomorrow," he finished. "Jenkins suspects I'm an investigator. He's put a price on my head, $500 to whoever brings me to him, dead or alive." Victoria felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. Garrett, a soft knock at the study door interrupted them. Hank entered, nodding to Garrett before addressing Victoria. "Rider coming fast from town," he reported. "Looks like the Simmons boy, David Jr." Victoria rose immediately. Young David was 17, the oldest of Martha and David Simmons' children. If he was riding to the T-Bar T at this hour, something was terribly wrong. They met David Jr. on the porch. The boy was breathless, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Miss Thornton," he gasped. Jenkins' men, they've taken my father, dragged him from our house an hour ago, said he was helping you, conspiring against Jenkins. Victoria felt sick. David was helping me? How? He wasn't, the boy insisted. Pa's been keeping his head down just like Jenkins wanted. But they found something in our barn papers about the water rights. Pa didn't put them there, I swear it. Someone planted them. Garrett and Victoria exchanged grim looks. Jenkins was creating a pretext for violence. Where did they take your father? Garrett asked. Triple Creek, David Jr. replied. They said. The boy's voice broke. They said they're going to make an example of him. Ma sent me to warn you she thinks you're next. Victoria's mind raced. David Simmons was a good man, a loving father, if Jenkins harmed him just to send a message. We need to get to Triple Creek, she said decisively. Now, before they hurt David. It could be a trap, Hank warned, drawing you out of the safety of the ranch. Even if it is, we can't abandon David, Victoria insisted. He's in danger because of me, Garrett nodded. We'll go together. Hank, keep most of the men here to protect the ranch, but send 2 of your best to ride with us. As they prepared to leave, Victoria changed into riding clothes and strapped on her father's gun belt. She was loading her rifle when Garrett entered the room. Victoria, he said softly. Before we go, there's something you should know. She turned to him, struck by the intensity in his expression. What is it? Garrett stepped closer. This could go badly. Jenkins has at least 15 men at Triple Creek, all armed. The odds aren't in our favor. I know the risks, Victoria said. I won't leave David to Jenkins' mercy. That's not what I meant. Garrett ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. What I'm trying to say is, these past few days, getting to know you, they've meant something to me. You've meant something to me. Victoria's heart skipped a beat. Garrett, you're the bravest person I've ever met, he continued. The most principled, and if we make it through this, I'd like the chance to know you better. Much better. Before Victoria could respond, Garrett closed the distance between them and kissed her gently. It was brief, but filled with promise, the possibility of something more, something deeper, if they survived the night ahead. When they parted, Victoria found herself at a loss for words. Garrett smiled slightly, touching her cheek with calloused fingers. For luck, he said simply. Now let's go save David Simmons. The ride to Triple Creek was tense and silent. Victoria, Garrett, Hank, and 2 of the T-Bar T-Ticket's best hands, Cole and Francisco, moved swiftly through the darkness. David Jr. had returned to his family with instructions to barricade themselves inside until word came that it was safe. As they approached Jenkins' ranch, Garrett signaled for them to dismount and proceed on foot. The main house and bunkhouse were brightly lit despite the late hour, and Victoria could see men moving about, some carrying rifles. There's the barn, Garrett whispered, pointing to a large structure set apart from the other buildings. If they're holding Simmons anywhere, it would be there. Victoria nodded. How do we get to him? We need a distraction, Garrett said. Something to draw attention away from the barn. Hank gestured toward the corral on the far side of the property. Set that on fire, and every man on the place will run to save the horses. No, Victoria said firmly. We won't endanger innocent animals. Garrett considered their options. The storage shed behind the bunkhouse. Jenkins keeps blasting powder there for the mining operation. We could create a small explosion, enough noise to draw attention without causing serious damage. Francisco, who had experience with explosives from his days working railroad construction, volunteered for the task. The plan was simple. Francisco would create the distraction while the others made their way to the barn to free David Simmons. They separated, moving carefully through the shadows. Victoria's heart pounded as she followed Garrett toward the barn, Hank and Cole close behind. They had almost reached it when a shout came from the direction of the main house. "Over there! Intruders!" A rifle shot cracked through the night, the bullet splintering wood near Victoria's head. Their presence had been discovered too soon. "Run for the barn," Garrett commanded, drawing his revolver and firing toward the source of the shots. Victoria sprinted forward, Hank providing covering fire as she reached the barn door. It was locked, but Cole made short work of it with an axe from his belt. They ducked inside just as Francisco's distraction detonated, the explosion sending men running in the opposite direction. The barn was dimly lit by a single lantern. In its glow, Victoria could make out a figure slumped against the far wall. David Simmons, his face bloody and his hands bound. "David!" She rushed to him, quickly cutting his bonds with her knife. "Can you walk?" Simmons looked up, his eyes dazed. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "Getting you home to Martha and the children," she replied, helping him to his feet. "Lean on me." Garrett appeared at her side, taking Simmons' weight. "We need to move. The distraction won't hold them long." They were halfway to the door when it burst open, revealing Harold Jenkins himself, flanked by 4 armed men. The rancher's face was contorted with rage, his revolver aimed directly at Victoria. "Miss Thornton," he snarled, "I should have known you'd be foolish enough to walk into my trap. And you brought Walker with you, how convenient." Garrett pushed Victoria behind him. "It's over, Jenkins. Territorial marshals are on their way. They know everything: the copper scheme, the bribes, the intimidation." Jenkins laughed, an ugly sound. "By the time any marshals arrive, there will be nothing left of you but buzzard food. And as for Miss Thornton," his eyes gleamed malevolently, "accidents happen all the time in the territory, especially to troublemaking women who don't know their place." Victoria stepped forward, refusing to cower. "Is that what happened to the Parkers, to old man Williams? Accidents?" "They were obstacles," Jenkins replied coldly. "Just like you, just like your father would have been if consumption hadn't taken him first." "You're finished, Jenkins," Garrett said. "Even if you kill us all, too many people know the truth now. Judge McCreary has evidence of your crimes. Kill us, and you'll hang for it." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jenkins' face, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. "Then I have nothing to lose." He raised his gun. "Goodbye, Mr. Walker." Everything happened at once. Victoria shouted a warning as Hank fired from the shadows, striking one of Jenkins' men. Cole tackled another as Garrett drew his weapon with lightning speed. Gunshots echoed through the barn, deafening in the enclosed space. Victoria saw Jenkins take aim at Garrett and acted without thinking. She threw herself forward, knocking Garrett aside as Jenkins fired. Pain exploded in her shoulder as the bullet meant for Garrett's heart struck her instead. Through a haze of agony, Victoria was dimly aware of more gunshots, of Garrett's voice calling her name, of hands lifting her gently. Then darkness claimed her, and she knew nothing more. Victoria drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of reality: Garrett's worried face, Hank's gruff voice giving orders, the jolting motion of a wagon beneath her. Pain throbbed in her shoulder with each heartbeat, but it seemed distant somehow, as though it belonged to someone else. She fully regained consciousness in her own bedroom at the T-Bar T. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, suggesting it was mid-morning. Her shoulder was heavily bandaged, and the slightest movement sent shooting pains down her arm. "You're awake." The relief in Garrett's voice was palpable. He sat in a chair beside her bed, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. "What happened?" Victoria asked, her throat dry. "Jenkins dead," Garrett said simply. "When you were shot, I lost control. I killed him." Victoria absorbed this information slowly. "The others?" 2 of Jenkins' men were killed, 2 wounded. The rest surrendered when they realized their boss was dead. Garrett reached for a glass of water on the bedside table, helping Victoria drink. David Simmons is recovering at home. His injuries weren't as serious as they appeared. And our men. All safe, Garrett assured her. Cole took a bullet in the arm, but Doc Wilson says he'll heal fine. Victoria leaned back against the pillows, relief washing over her despite the pain. It's over then. Almost, Garrett said. The territorial marshals arrived this morning. They're arresting Mayor Holloway and Sheriff Tanner for their roles in Jenkins' scheme, and Judge Lester has ordered all of Jenkins' property held pending investigation. Victoria closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the swift resolution. And the creek, the water rights. Safe, Garrett confirmed. The water rights agreement you found will be binding on whoever eventually purchases Jenkins' land. No one will be able to dam that creek or pollute it with mining operations. Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders, both figurative and literal, as the pain began to recede slightly. Good. My father would be pleased. He would be proud, Garrett corrected gently. You stood against corruption and won, Victoria. You saved not just your own ranch, but all the farms and ranches along Creek Creek. Victoria managed a small smile. We did it together. Then a thought struck her. What happens now? With your investigation complete, will you be leaving? Garrett took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. That depends. On what? On whether there's a reason for me to stay. His green eyes held hers steadily, the question in them unmistakable. Victoria's heart quickened. The Triple Creek will need a new owner, she said softly. Someone who understands ranching, who respects the land and the people who work it. Garrett smiled, understanding her implication. Are you suggesting I put down roots, Miss Thornton? I think you've been drifting long enough, Mr. Walker, Victoria replied, returning his smile despite the pain. Besides, Kingman could use more troublemakers, keeps life interesting. Garrett laughed, then leaned forward to kiss her softly. I was hoping you'd say something like that. In the days that followed, Victoria's recovery progressed steadily. The bullet had struck her shoulder but missed any vital areas, and Doc Wilson assured her she would regain full use of her arm in time. Garrett remained at the T-Bar T, helping Hank manage the ranch while Victoria recuperated. The territorial marshals concluded their investigation, uncovering the full extent of Jenkins' corruption and illegal activities. Mayor Holloway and Sheriff Tanner were removed from office, awaiting trial for their complicity. As news of Jenkins' defeat spread, the atmosphere in Kingman began to change. Ranchers who had been intimidated into silence now spoke freely about the threats they'd endured. Several of Jenkins' former employees came forward with damning testimonies about his business practices. Judge McCreary, impressed by Garrett's work on the case, offered him a position as a territorial investigator. Garrett declined, explaining that he had other plans that involved putting down roots in Kingman. 1 month after the confrontation at Triple Creek, Victoria was strong enough to ride into town for the auction of Jenkins' property. The territorial court had ordered the ranch sold, with proceeds to compensate those who had suffered losses due to Jenkins' actions. Victoria and Garrett attended together, their relationship now openly acknowledged. Many in Kingman had revised their opinion of that troublemaking Thornton woman, recognizing that her stubborn resistance to Jenkins had ultimately saved the town from environmental disaster. When Triple Creek came up for auction, several buyers showed interest, but it was Garrett who placed the winning bid, using funds from his years of work as a ranger and investigator. As the auctioneer's gavel fell, Victoria squeezed his hand in silent support. "Congratulations, Mr. Walker," Judge Lester said after the auction. I trust Triple Creek will prosper under more honest management. It will, Garrett assured him, and it will respect the water rights agreement that Miss Thornton fought so hard to uphold. As they rode back to the T-Bar T that afternoon, Victoria felt a sense of completion. The battle that had consumed her for months was over. Justice had prevailed, and something new and precious had emerged from the struggle her relationship with Garrett. "A penny for your thoughts," Garrett said as they rode side by side, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson. Victoria smiled. "I was thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't approached me that day outside the mayor's office." "Fate has a way of bringing the right people together at the right time," Garrett replied. "Though I admit, when Jenkins hired me, I never expected to find love as well as justice." The word love hung in the air between them, spoken for the first time. Victoria's heart swelled with emotion. "Is that what you found?" she asked softly. "Love." Garrett reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Victoria Thornton, I have admired your courage from the first moment I saw you. I've come to respect your intelligence, your principles, and your fierce loyalty to those you care about." His voice deepened with emotion. "And yes, somewhere along the way, admiration and respect became love. I love you, Victoria, more than I thought possible." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "Even though I'm nothing but trouble," Garrett smiled, reaching across to take her hand. "Especially because you're trouble, the best kind of trouble, the kind that stands up for what's right, no matter the cost." His expression grew serious. "I know it's soon, perhaps too soon. But I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you consider a future together? Not just as neighbors, but as partners in all things?" Victoria didn't need to consider. The answer was already in her heart. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to everything." Garrett's smile was radiant as he leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her, a kiss full of promise and shared dreams. 2 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Victoria Thornton became Victoria Walker in a ceremony at the T-Bar T. The entire community turned out to witness the union, even those who had once disapproved of Victoria's troublemaking ways. Martha Simmons, now a close friend, helped Victoria prepare for the ceremony. "You've changed this town, Victoria," she said as she arranged the veil. "Shown us all what courage looks like." Victoria smiled, touching the simple gold band that had belonged to her mother. "I was just fighting for what my father built." "You did more than that," Martha insisted. "You showed every woman in Kingman that we don't have to accept injustice, that our voices matter." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Garrett, handsome in a new suit, waited beneath an arch of autumn flowers as Hank proudly escorted Victoria to her groom. Judge Lester, now a friend as well as an ally, performed the ceremony with evident pleasure. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," he declared to enthusiastic applause from the gathered community. The celebration continued well into the evening with food, music, and dancing. Victoria and Garrett moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from ranchers, townspeople, and the new territorial marshal who had replaced Sheriff Tanner. As the party wound down, Garrett led Victoria away from the crowd, toward the rise overlooking both their properties, the T-Bar T and Triple Creek, neighboring ranches now united not just by marriage but by a shared vision for the future. "Mrs. Walker," Garrett said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "How does it feel to be a respectable married woman instead of Kingman's most notorious troublemaker?" Victoria laughed, leaning back against his chest. "Who says I can't be both?" "I suspect Kingman hasn't seen the last of my troublemaking days." "I certainly hope not," Garrett murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Trouble keeps life interesting, after all." As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Victoria and Garrett stood together on the land they both loved, their future stretching before them like the vast Arizona landscape, challenging, beautiful, and full of possibility. 5 years later, Victoria sat on the porch of the expanded T-Bar T Ranch house, watching her 3-year-old son Thomas chase butterflies across the yard while his 1-year-old sister Elizabeth napped in her cradle nearby. Garrett's black gelding appeared on the horizon, returning from his morning inspection of the cattle. The years had brought many changes to Kingman and to the Walker family. The Triple Creek and T-Bar T ranches had been officially merged, creating one of the most successful operations in the territory. Garrett had been elected to the territorial legislature, where he fought for fair water rights and land policies. Victoria had started a school on their property, ensuring that ranch children, including the 5 young Simmons, received an education. And the troublemaking woman who had once stood alone against corruption now had a family and a community that shared her values. Her reputation remained, but these days it was spoken of with admiration rather than disapproval. As Garrett dismounted and swept young Thomas into his arms, Victoria felt the familiar surge of love that had only deepened with time. They had built something remarkable together, not just a ranch, but a legacy of integrity that would endure long after they were gone. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked as he joined her on the porch, Thomas riding on his shoulders. Victoria smiled, taking his hand. "I was remembering what you said the first time we met, about trouble keeping life interesting." Garrett grinned, the same boyish smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "I was right, wasn't I?" Victoria looked at their children, their home, the land they had protected together. "Yes," she agreed softly. "You were absolutely right." And as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Victoria knew she wouldn't trade her troublemaking life for all the peace and quiet in the world. Some kinds of trouble were worth every moment, especially the kind that led to love.